What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the first episode of season two of Behind Enemy Lines, a Texas A&M football podcast. I am your host, Tony Catalina, alongside a very special guest, Shehan Jeyarajah. How are you doing, my friend? How are you? You've had a pretty eventful summer this summer, huh?
Yeah, it's been a crazy one. A lot of fun though. And no, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously we had talked about it last season, get you on the podcast. You're doing amazing stuff over at CBS Sports. So appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, football is upon us. The reason why we're here and we're talking is it feels like Christmas Eve. I know tomorrow, Texas A&M, that is Tuesday for people listening to this. First availability of the season. There's a lot of hope and optimism here in the SEC in Aggie land, but wanted to get your take on it. So we'll jump right into it. Mike Elko, this offseason, year two. What is the national scale? I mean, obviously you can speak for yourself. You don't have to speak for the other people, but what is the sense around Mike Elko and what he's building in this program so far this in his tenure?
Well, I think people have been very impressed. I think that people are very impressed by how quickly he's managed to pull things together. I mean, look, obviously he had familiarity with the program during his time under Jimbo Fisher, but I think that he's been very aggressive in trying to right some of the wrongs, I guess you'd say, of the Fisher era. I don't think it's a secret inside or outside of the building that they had some disagreements about how to approach this new era. But I think the other thing too that I've loved so much about it is he's kind of that rare hard-nosed defensive coach who very much still, I think, is modern, very much still has a modern view of the game, who very much still wants to be dynamic on offense, prioritizes that side of the ball, is very aggressive in the way that he recruits and the transfer portal. And, it's funny, I got a chance to talk to some folks over at Duke earlier this offseason, and like, that's just what I heard, right? Like, I heard that so much was just Mike Elko is a forward-thinking guy who I think there's a lot to be excited about with how he's building his roster and building Texas A&M.
Yeah, and so more specifically, Mike Elko, there was a lot of conversation about him kind of taking more of a hands-on approach with the defense this year. What do you put stock into that? Is that just coach speak? Hey, I'm going to be more in tuned in that, or do you think there's some real value in the head coach saying, hey, like, listen, I'm going to make sure that this unit is up to the par that I hope it is.
Well, I think there's a couple pieces to this. One is I think that that's an expression of how much faith that Mike Elko has in his offense and offensive coordinator, Colin Klein. He feels like he can be left alone a little bit more. I think it's a testament to how he feels like he's built up his organization at this point, where he doesn't have to every single moment be worried about player personnel and things like that. But it is also a statement about some of the shortcomings that this unit had last year. And I mean, you go back, right? Like Mike Elko is one of the great defensive coordinators in college football over the last 5 or 10 years. And last year's unit, while it certainly wasn't bad, it wasn't the quality of unit that I think that you expect from it. Especially, I would argue, especially on the back end, right? Like it was a situation where guys got lost, guys were in the wrong place. I think that there were just lapses at times, and that's where I feel like they're going to feel the most benefit. Because like you look at, I mean, up front, right? They're known commodities up there. Linebacker, I think there's very known commodities. Like that might be the strongest group on the team. But it's a secondary, I think, where, getting somebody in there who has so much experience working with DBs, working with safeties, right? I mean, he's part of, some great DBs during his time at Notre Dame, at Duke, at Texas A&M, of course, the first time. I think that that's maybe where you start to see some benefit. I will say at the same time, I think as a head coach, you always have to find a balance. You don't want to focus on one thing and not prioritize everything else too well. But again, I think that they've got good infrastructure in place that if Mike Elko is able to kind of maximize what he does on defense, it puts him in a good spot.
For sure. And we had talked, I had mentioned this all off season. They added Lyle Hemphill from JMU, who was with him and Duke. And so there's another part of that piece that this comfortability in this scheme and what they're building. It's another guy that knows how to coach what he's looking for. And even though he's more hands-on, he also has a guy he knows he can trust and run his system. But you had talked about a lot of, some of the breakdowns in the back end, and some of that could be attrition. It could be depth. And with that comes recruiting and an emphasis that they've put big time to get, potential top five class. His first one was a top 10 class when he first got here with a shortened off season. What have you seen, or what has your impressions been of Elko and this staff when it comes to recruiting, not only in Texas, but nationally?
Well, I think you have to be incredibly impressed, right? I mean, you look at this class that he's putting together in 2026, number three so far, three 5 stars in the top 247. Like, this is a big time class. And I think that even you look back to last year, like you mentioned, like, I mean, another top end class. And I will say too, I think that at Texas A&M under Jimbo, we got used to having top 10 classes or whatever it was. But I think that what I've seen and liked so far from Elko is that I feel like his classes have one, been a bit more diversified in terms of personnel that they're bringing in, and two, are notably strong in the trenches. Of course, Lamont Rogers being the top guy coming in last year as a 5 star offensive tackle. We know what this program is on the defensive line. That's kind of a known commodity at this point. And I think the other thing too is that, not even just getting into the high school recruiting, but also the portal class. I mean, some of the guys that they were able to land, Casey Concepcion is one who comes to mind. Like, I think that they did a great job of quickly jumping on needs and holes for this team. And so they've done a great job of executing. There's a couple different pieces to recruiting in this era. And actually, I've got a story coming out in the next couple of days that kind of gets into it. But when you talk about recruiting, especially at a place like Texas A&M, you got to have multiple tracks available to you. There's the building high school relationships track. There's the NIL roster retention, cap management, I guess you can call it, track. And then there's also just the evaluating your own roster track. And I think that Texas A&M staff, it's still early. Obviously we don't want to, throw any parades quite as yet, but I think that they've done a really nice job of hitting all three of those tracks in different ways.
And that's so fascinating because I'm right there with you. I believe that they approach things in a refreshing manner, right? I think they're honest about what they have for talent. They're moldable to what they want to do, to what talent they have in the room. You'd spoken about Colin Klein and the trust there with the offense. He's a guy who loves two tight end sets. He loves, the RPO, and with Connor Wegman and the lack of productivity at the tight end room, they had to get, creative at times last year to have productive offense. Now, with the way they're building and attacking and approaching the transfer portal, they feel like this offense could probably be more to what a Colin Klein offense wants to look like. So I say all that to say, like, do you see from like this staff just that honest approach to development? I know NIL has changed the way things go, but money is thrown around like crazy. But Elko has said, like, hey, we're not going to get for the biggest ticket guy. We're going to get the guy that fits this program more. And I don't know if you feel that or see that sentiment as well.
Yeah, I think that I do. Obviously, that's something that when you talk about long-term credibility is built over multiple years. But like you said, I think that the way that they've identified has been really solid so far. I think that they've built relationships early. They've gotten guys on campus that I think fit. Again, I was just, I'm sure A&M fans don't want to hear too much about this, right? But like, I was re-looking at that 2022 recruiting class, right? And it's like 22 of the 30 kids have already transferred, there are one or two other guys who just stepped away from football. And so I think that they've done a good job of finding guys who are going to fit their competitive culture. I mean, one thing that you hear a lot about Mike Elko is that he's kind of a taskmaster. He's not necessarily, he's a very personable guy, but he's not a player's coach in the way that he coaches. And I think they've been very upfront about that when they've gone through the recruiting process and said, hey, we want to make sure that you're able to hang with what we're building here, because it's not necessarily an easy place if you don't love football. And that was actually one thing too, even just going back to the hiring of Elko. I made the comparison at the time to RC Slocum, because I think in so many ways, right? Like, this has been a program that was building up, and when RC Slocum took it over, he brings in this physical defensive culture. He brings in, what you're gonna get, what it takes to be here. And look, I know that like people want even more than what RC Slocum brought to the table, which obviously, being in this moment, the money, the resource at SCL, this, like, obviously that gives you a chance to be even more on the national level. But I think that it is such a great echo of that moment in time. Just the way that Mike Elko is doing things, but again, with that modern flair on it as well.
Yeah, no, that's I'm right there with you. I think it's really fascinating to see it and kind of be involved in it and just to see the approach and the message and the standard not wavering, right? When Mike Elko says something, in February, the message is the same in April, and there isn't, any type of missteps in that. So that's been refreshing. I understand that it's just year two and you're judged by wins and losses, but you feel good about the guy that's leading the program. And I'm glad that you, from a national scale, kind of has a 30,000-foot view of it, can see that as well. Turning the page, though, to on the field, a lot of A&M success is going to ride on the shoulders of redshirt sophomore quarterback Marcel Reed. Now, you look at the SEC, there's a lot of questions about who is going to be the top dog, right? We look at the DJ Lagways, we look at the John Mateers. Even he has questions coming over from Washington State. Obviously, he's not in that upper echelon right now with the quarterbacks getting mentioned in the conference. But what is the sense from you and potentially even just that full holistic view of what Marcel Reed is and what he can be in 2025?
Yeah, Marcel is one of the more fascinating players, I would think, in the SEC coming into 2025 for a couple of reasons. One, when he was brought in, right, like nobody kind of thought that he was going to be the quarterback of the future. He wasn't necessarily seen as that kind of player, especially with Connor Wegman on campus and, some of the guys that they had committed behind him. The other piece, though, too, is that I think that ironically, like Colin Klein is a perfect offensive coordinator, I think, to build around a player like Marcel Reed. You know what he can do in the running game. You know what talent he possesses as a passer, right? Like I was going to school in the Big 12 back in 2012 when Colin Klein was doing his thing, and I think that there's some natural comparisons there. The thing that I think I want to see, and that it's interesting to hear A&M talk about, is his development as a passer, right? Because look, in Conklein's system, and we saw this when they moved from Connor Wegman, who's a little bit more drop back, to Marcel Reed, who obviously is much more dual threat. And Wegman could run, but it's a different type of running than obviously what Marcel Reed can do. I think that what was interesting to me is like they're able to per se like kind of move him as a passer, hide him as a passer in some ways. So the question for me heading into 2025 is okay, well, like once that's off the table, do they have that next step with him, right? I think that we saw like I was at the LSU game with you last year, and you see this moment where, again, they go downfield, he's throwing these bombs, he's also creating stuff with his legs, but he wasn't asked to do short and intermediate type stuff, right? In the Southeastern Conference, you're going to be asked to do that kind of stuff, and you're going to have to do it well. And that remains my question. Now, I think that one other thing that's great about settling on Marcel Reed as your quarterback is that I think that so much of this offseason, especially on the offensive side of the ball, was building around him. I mentioned Casey Concepcion coming in, right? Like I mentioned, some of the tight ends. They brought in two or three tight ends in the transfer portal, right? Because, like you said, they love to run a lot of 12 personnel, and I think that they'll have more ability to do so in 2025. So you want to give him, I think, some easy answers is probably the biggest thing that I'd say about it. Because, look, I think he has incredible upside at this point, but the floor is real low too, especially when you compare him to a lot of these other quarterbacks in the SEC that are really, really talented. We're also blue chip recruits. So that's the final step I want to see. Can he do the short and intermediate passing stuff? Because once that comes together, he is as good as anybody in the country.
No, I'm right there with you with that. And I would actually ask you this. The way they're built, you had talked about the way they built a friendly offense for him. 5 returning starters on offensive line, additional 2 guys who had played, all the weapons they added, the running back stable with 4 guys who have toted the rock last year. Does he have to be great this year for A&M to be a CFP team? Does he have to be outstanding for this team to be in that conversation?
No, no, absolutely not. He needs to be consistent. That's what he needs to be more than anything else. And that was, again, that's been a problem the past couple years at quarterback for Texas A&M. It's just having that consistency. Maybe even if you want to go all the way back until, when Kellen Mond was here as a senior. Like it's just been kind of inconsistent play year after year. And so what you need from him is you need him to be just throwing numbers out there, a 64% completion guy on decent volume. You need him to get close to maybe 3,000 yards as a passer. You need him to have, let's say, less than 6 interceptions. And then you need him, obviously, to be a threat in the running game. I think that's enough for Texas A&M to be in the college football playoff conversation because defensively, again, I expect another level of improvement. I expect them to be able to run the ball. I haven't been around this. I assume Le'Veon Moss's situation has been cleared up at this point. So like they're going to be able to run the ball at a high level behind a really talented and veteran offensive line. So what you need from the quarterback position is just be the ringleader, be the guy at the head of the snake, making the right decisions, not steering them astray, and more than anything else, don't lose them games.
Right. No, I'm with you. And so I'm glad that I got you here because I've only been here, 11 months. I'm not even a full year in Texas at this point. You've been around Texas football a long time. This fan base, A&M fan base, feels snake bitten. If I'm wrong, you can correct me. People can attack me for that. I'm cool with that. They feel snake bitten, but do they have reasons for optimism this year? Like I know every time you see somebody drink a little bit of the Kool-Aid, there's always somebody there to knock them down. Does A&M have fan base? Does the fan base have real reason to believe that this season could be different for them?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that it's funny, right? Sometimes you want to view sports as like a math problem, right? You want to view like you put X in, you add Y to it, you should get Z. And A&M's put the X and Y into it and gotten something completely different so much of the time, right? I mean, last year obviously was crazy. Like just some of the downs that they had to go through. But all that said, I mean, look, I mentioned it, right? Like this is a multi-year thing. This is a long-term situation with Mike Elko, where when you bring in a coach like that, you want to try to control the controllables. And then whatever happens from there happens, right? A bounce goes one way or the other, stuff like that, right? But you want to give yourself as good a chance as any to at least be in the conversation when it happens. And for all the great players that have come through A&M over the past 15 years, all this sort of stuff, there's only been a handful of years where Texas A&M has put together rosters that quote unquote really really deserved to be there, where they minimize some of these outside forces, I guess you could say. Obviously the 2012 roster is one, the 2020 roster, the Orange Bowl team was one of them, and like last year I think is a great example of a roster that was puncher's chance level but not clearly deserve to be here level, right? And I think that 2025 is when they continue to make that next step to we should expect to be here level. Now, does that mean that they're gonna win the SEC or go to the playoff necessarily? Not necessarily, but I do think that we are heading to a point where the floor of this program is rising to such a level that there should be less chaos. There should be less moments where you show up and lose a game that you're not supposed to by 14, right? And that was the thing that I wanted to see, even just in general from Texas A&M in year one under Mike Elko, was just, hey, can you be in a position to be competitive in every game? Can you not, stub your toe too many times this season? Some of it's inevitable for a first year staff, but like, hey, you know what? They gave Notre Dame everything that they could have. That Florida game, I think, has aged a little better than maybe we expected. So don't have the Auburn situation happen. Don't get blown out by South Carolina, right? Like you just have to handle those moments better. And if they're able to do that, I think that they give themselves a chance.
I'm with you there. I think, expectations, there is optimism there. There is a reason to believe that this team can achieve any goal they want to. But with that being said, I just want to put you on the spot before we get you out of here. You don't have to put a number on it, but what do you expect? We talked about what it could be, but what do you see it being in 2025?
Yeah, I think that they're gonna again have a chance to be competitive. For like record perspectives, I mean, going to Notre Dame in week three, that's a tough situation to be in. And they're gonna have to recover right away to play Auburn, Mississippi State, Florida right after that, right? So, but I think that this is a team again that will take a step forward. They were an 8-win team last year. I think that they'll get to 9 this year. I think they'll be a 9-3 type team. I think they'll be competitive with everybody. Look, and their schedule isn't bad outside of that Notre Dame game. On the road against LSU, that's a tough one. That Texas game, I'll tell you what, I really hope that we get a better version of it in 2025 for A&M's sake than we did in 2024. Hopefully I'll be down for that one. I don't know, I'll have to figure out. But the rest of the schedule, I mean, again, most of the hard games are at home. When you talk about Auburn, Florida, South Carolina, like those games are very much winnable. And so I want to see them pick off one of those three really hard road games, Notre Dame, LSU, and Texas. And I want to see them mostly hold serve at home and get to 9-3. So I think that 8-4 would be acceptable to me, but not an especially good season. I think that 9 would be a successful season to me. And again, if you have 9, especially with playing Notre Dame in the non-conference, that's going to at least put you in a position to be in the conversation to have a college football playoff spot.
Yeah, you know what? If the fact that I'm agreeing with you validated my own feelings, because you're on the money, man, I really, really appreciate it. Your time, Jeyarajah. Listen, it's been a pleasure, man. I really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Make sure we check out his all this stuff at CBS Sports and everything that comes with it. You had a great, great article about Texas off season. I'm sure plenty, plenty more to come. Again, man, thank you very much.